It's time for some unboxing. Hey folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So I've got two boxes here that actually came together, although they were posted separately for reasons that I'll briefly explain because it's of perhaps slight interest to UK viewers. So you'll notice this box has border force tape all over it. This one doesn't. So why has this one been checked by the UK police and this one has not? Because the swords in this one are very slightly curved. And that's right. That means in the UK, because the blade is slightly curved, it is verboten for people who aren't me, basically. No, for people who don't have a legal defence. So in this case, my documents were attached to this box, and in fact, we attached them to this box as well, just to make sure. But they were attached to this box because in the UK, you can only import, buy, or own curved swords if you do martial arts, fencing, reenactment, you're involved in theatre productions, filming, that could even include YouTube videos, we're not really sure, or if it's traditionally made according to hand-making methods, whatever that means. So, to cut a long story short, these were stuck in quarantine or stuck in customs for a bit, and because this package had come with them, I think these got stuck as well. Generally speaking, and these got waved through, incidentally, because my documents were attached. So Border Force didn't contact me. I didn't have to go through any rigmarole this time. I have done in the past. I've had to wait months and months in the past, but these took about 2 months in customs for them to clear them through, and they came straight to me. Straight swords should get straight to your door. Right, so these are from Chen. First thing I'll say is, I do know what's inside these packages, okay, and they are two-handed Chinese swords. If we're going to look at the context here, and as you know, that's what I do on this channel, if we go all the way back to the Han Dynasty, there were in fact large two-handed swords at a time when there were no two-handed swords anywhere else in the world that I know of. Massive great two-handed swords, the size of certainly a large long sword, that were being used by specialist soldiers in the Han Dynasty, who were wearing armour, incidentally, that I believe was made of rhino hide. So there were, going all the way back like 2,000 years, there were two-handed steel-bladed swords in China. Amazing. I've made videos about those before. Search on my channel if you haven't seen those yet. Equally, if we fast forward to the 20th century, then we've got the Miao Dao, and this is Chen's 20th century two-handed sword. I haven't done a full review of this one yet, actually, but I certainly will do. Now, these were inspired by Ming Dynasty large two-handed Dao, or single-edged swords, essentially two-handed sabers. And in turn, those swords were probably inspired by Japanese Nodashi, and so the standard explanation is that Chinese encountering Japanese mercenaries and pirates and stuff like that wanted a sword that could basically match what the Japanese were using against them. I think in the 14th century by European dating, and so they made essentially swords that were based on the Japanese swords. Moreover, the Chinese imported Japanese swords. So there are records of warlords essentially in China importing hundreds and thousands of swords and blades from Japan. And this influenced Chinese sword design to some degree. So the influence between Chinese and Japanese swords went both ways. In the earlier years, pre-1000 AD, certainly the Japanese were influenced by the Chinese. But later on in the Ming Dynasty, so Europe's equivalent to the Middle Ages, it seems that the Chinese were influenced partially by the Japanese, also probably by the Mongols and various other people as well. And later on by the Europeans, it has to be said, but save that for another video. So this is a Miao Dao, which is essentially the 20th century revival design of an earlier Ming Dynasty two-handed Dao. Okay, and they were known by various names. I won't go into that now. So, let's get on with the unboxing. If you're in the UK shipping things from China that have got a curved blade, obviously attach all of your legal defences to the outside or they will be seized and you might not get them back. It's a terrible system, but there we go, we have to live with it. If you want to find out more about the legal side of things, if you have a look on the Matt Easton website, linked below here, you can find I've got a page on UK curved sword law. Right, so LK Chen posts things quite efficiently, I think, actually, in terms of their packaging. They have cardboard around polystyrene. I've only ever had one thing come to me with very slight damage, and in that case the outside of the box was damaged. But generally speaking, their packaging is quite light but also quite strong, and in my case they use UPS. If you're importing to the UK, swords, never ever ever use FedEx. FedEx in the UK will not accept weapons of any kind, including swords and knives. So they will get returned from the UK border by FedEx. It's not the UK government, that's FedEx. Right, ooh, right, okay, there's a big bit of polystyrene. Ah, I hate polystyrene. Oh, blimey. Right, okay. What have we got? So these should be, these have got the border force tape on, so these should be the curved ones. So I've got the bottom end of the sword here. Let's try and, I don't want to stab myself when I think I'm going to have to go in from the other end, guys, because I think the guard has wedged this in place. So let's now open this up at the other end instead. So yeah, essentially large two-handed swords in China at this time, I think, were sometimes known as horse cutting swords or horse chopping swords, and it's not entirely known why. Is that because they could fell a horse? Is that because they were used against cavalry? Is it simply indicative of their cutting power, the fact that you could chop through a horse with one? There's some possible parallels here, incidentally, with the Dane axe and its representation in the Bayeux tapestry. So maybe they were used against cavalry, but then again you think, well, they've got spears, and spears are pretty much the best thing against cavalry. So maybe they were mixed up with spears. Who knows? I think that one's still out for debate. So I can see a ring pommel. Let's get that ring pommel and pull. Okay, so the guard has come through the box. Okay, so this is going to be more difficult to get out than I'd previously anticipated. Let's see. Oh, there's another ring pommel here. Let's grab the other ring pommel instead. Nope, they're both stuck. I'm going to have to cut this box completely apart. Oh, there we go. Oh, oh my gosh. Right. Oh, well, these are massive. Okay, so these are the straight ones. That's really confusing. So the straight ones, no, I'm not sure now. No. Hold on. Well, let's see. So let's have a look at this one first. So I didn't want to spoiler myself, so I can't remember LK Chen's names for these, but I'll put a link below to LK Chen's website. So this is purely a first impressions video. So first impression of the hilt, it's got a crossguard like a European medieval sword that is clearly forged, not cast, I would say anyway. And the grip instantly impresses me because it has a flat back and a teardrop or oval front, which really, actually it'd be nice as a thumb up saber grip, gives really good edge alignment. And then it's got the characteristic Chinese ring pommel, which first appears I think in the Han Dynasty, but certainly Tang Dynasty maybe, but certainly a lot earlier. And the ring pommel really becomes characteristic, almost a national emblem of Chinese swords, all the way up to the 20th century, even today. Right, so, my gosh. Oh, jeez. Right, it's wrapped in cling film, if you're wondering why so these are protective scabbards. These are not scabbards that are historical, I don't think. But you'll notice that you'll notice that it's got a strap, so you could sling it on your back. But this has got cling film around the blade. Let's take this off. Oh, that's a crazy blade. So it looks quite, it reminds me of both Tang Dynasty Chinese blades, and it reminds me of some Japanese blades. I'm being very careful of this because it looks super sharp. My gosh, that is, oh, That is crazy formidable. I've got an oily cloth here just to give it a wipe off, because it's got sort of residue all over it, which is either wax or oil, not sure which. Let's wipe that off. I'm trying not to swear here. That is monstrous. My gosh. But what's funny is it's really wieldable. Although it's overall, obviously I can't put the tip of the ground because it's sharp, although it's overall quite long, a lot of that length is the hilt. It kind of reminds me of some of the cleavers you see in the Morgan Bible. So it's got a massive, it's almost more like a pole arm, but it's got distal taper along the spine, and it also has some profile taper this way. But then look at that kisaki, it would be if it was Japanese, but look at that tip. That is monstrous. It's like a chisel. Oh my gosh, that is scary. That is a terrifying great beast of a thing. My gosh. Wow. Okay, I'm looking forward to cutting with that. That is just horrendous and impressive at the same time. Right, let's have a look at the other one here. So this has got a simpler grip, I should say, more utilitarian grip, wrapped with what looks like Hessian string. But I've seen lots of antiques wrapped with very similar stuff to that. Oh, okay, so this is like a giant version of the one-hander that I've got, which, if I remember correctly, is 13th century, Ming Dynasty. So these are the straight blades. So I'm really, really perplexed now why the border force tape is on the box with straight swords, but not on the box with curved swords. I'm super confused now. Anyway, let's not question the bizarre world of UK weapons law, because I don't think we'll ever find any satisfactory answers going down that road. Right, just taking this cling film off. This is just... This is scary looking. Again, I'll give it a wipe off with the oily rag. Oh my golly. Right, so it's very, very similar to the one-handed one, which I have reviewed and cut with. One of the most noticeable things you immediately see about it actually is that teardrop guard, which I suppose if you're visually trying to index the sword, because it's straight, you don't necessarily know which side is forward and which side is back, and it's got a completely blunt spine, so you don't want to hit someone with a blunt back. So visually having that point there, I mean, you can even feel it with your thumb or your finger. By doing this, you can feel which way is forward, so you don't even need to look. You can feel, yep, there's the point, that's my edge. And this thing, similarly to the other one, it hasn't got a hugely long blade. It's quite similar actually, but it's got a long hilt relative to the blade. So they're fearsome, fearsome swords. And this almost broken back sax like cutting tip, and you know, that would be the broken back on a sax here. Obviously the angles are different and there's no relationship between the weapons as far as we know anyway, but that gives you a completely straight cutting edge. It's got distal taper, but it has no in fact, if anything, I think it gets slightly broader towards the tip in this way, but it gets thinner going this way. So this certainly feels more hefty in the hand than, it almost feels axe-like actually. It doesn't feel dissimilar to a Dane axe. So it is quite a top-heavy weapon, quite a top-heavy chopper this, but my God, that would be terrifying being swung at you, wouldn't it? So let's have a look at the second box. I think out of those two, to use as a weapon, I prefer this one because it just feels more nimble. And it looks, I just love the fuller in it. Look at that cool. Look at that cool fuller and that tip. I really like that. My God, someone would run a mile, wouldn't they, if you came at an opponent with this. My gosh, what an impressive thing. And the other one is, I won't say at all less impressive. In many ways, it's more impressive. It's more intimidating and more fearsome. But just in the hand, it is more of a, whoa, it's more of an axe. It's an absolute beast. But of course, compared to an axe, it doesn't have a shaft that can be chopped into or broken or grabbed or grappled. It has a long blade, long steel blade, practically indestructible, and a huge, great long edge that you hit an opponent with any part of that, even if you hit them down near the guard, you can then turn it into a draw cut. Just a huge amount of effectiveness from that. Christ, that is just a fearsome thing. Right, okay, let's get on to this second box. I'm really confused now as to why the border force tape was on the box that I think contains curved swords, although actually I think maybe this has been taped back together as well. Yeah, it has. This has been opened and cut. So they have checked both boxes. Okay, that's interesting. But they only, for some reason, they use transparent tape on this one. So that's kind of good. I like to understand the process, even if the process is BS. I like to understand what's going on with border force because it relates to all of my dealings, essentially. I have to also mention at this point, I have remembered while I've been talking, one of these swords is 19th, 20th century, I think. And it's a type of sword that is inspired by earlier Ming Dao, but then was revived to fight the Japanese, basically, in World War II. And certain soldiers were equipped with them and famously wore them on their backs. Oh my God. Oh my gosh. Right, okay, so that one I've just been talking about, let's look at that one first. I'm going to have to... You can see an enormous pommel here, which we will get to second. Let's have a look at the first one. So the first one is the Dadao, I believe, which is a type of sword that was, like I say, it has its roots actually way back in the Ming Dynasty, but was revived in the 20th century by the People's Army in China to fight the Japanese imperialists, and they were sometimes worn on the back, and they appear in quite a few photos, publicity photos from World War II. So it's kind of got a modern-ish scabbard with press studs on it, and it's got a red grip, more flamboyant. Let's get the plastic's all tearing. Again, we've got a ring pommel, and ring pommels are really, oh, it's got a cool ribbon thing. Okay, I'll just leave it on there for now. So let's, oh, I see. So, because it's a blade that gets broader towards the end, they've put it into an open-backed press stud opening scabbard like that. Huh. What a cool sword. So that is not as big as I expected it to be, but I don't mean that in a bad way. I actually mean that in quite a good way. It's actually quite a handy little sword. It's more like a messer, actually. In fact, it's a hell of a lot like a messer or a falchion. I mean, technically from its construction, it's more like a falchion than a messer. So yeah, that's cool. That is a really, really thick spine. Now, one thing I will mention, unfortunately, is in transit, the tip has got damaged, which, if you're buying one of these, would be really, really gutting. You can see with the end of the box, it's actually come through the scabbard there. So, word of advice I would say to LK Chen, I think the ends of your boxes probably need a piece of wood or plastic over the end or something to protect that from happening. For me, it's not a disaster. I can fix that with a file and a grinder. But it would be disappointing, definitely, if you just ordered one sword and you were looking forward to getting this and it came with a bent tip. Now let's cut this bag off if I can, so we can see how this thing handles. Let's have a little look. I need to sharpen my knife. I think it's not as sharp as I would like it to be. Ooh, right, okay. So it is attached. But yeah, so that's something that I've seen in Kung Fu displays, and there's a lot of debate on the internet as to the reasons for it. But clearly when you move a sword around, it gives a nice twirly, it looks cool, doesn't it? Wow, I'm just watching on camera there. That's quite mesmerising. I've literally never had anything like that attached to the back end of a sword before, but that's quite fun. I'll have some fun with that. Right. So this is something you will, I guess, see in martial arts movies. It's often something that is it's implied that this is a much older type of weapon. It's put into a kind of medieval or Ming Dynasty context. I don't know how close this is to the Ming examples, and it doesn't actually look like the military examples I've seen from the 20th century. So I'm not going to say too much more about the history of this, because I need to go and do some research. Ooh, sharp. But more, that is a cleaver. I mean, it feels like a meat cleaver. It's not very long, but it's got a lot of cutting authority. And I really like the quite flat cross-section of the grip. And it's got a guard a little bit like European cross guards. So, interesting sword. I'm not sure, I personally find in use, I'd probably find this red ribbon on the end, I'll probably take that off. Probably for test cutting I will anyway. But yeah, cool sword, and so unmistakably Chinese, isn't it? I mean, this type of sword is shown in so much iconography. Right, on to the final one. Now this is actually, I think, this is what's called the double wave. And this is one of the ones that I was most looking forward to getting, actually. It's a really, really interesting type of sword. And hopefully the point is intact on this one. It feels like it is. Look at that. So it's in basically a sacrificial modern storage scabbard. The scabbards with these, often they wouldn't have had scabbards in reality. They just would have been carried like a polearm. Or they would have been wrapped up and strapped on something for transport, a bit like a European Zweihander. So with the construction of this, one of the most noticeable and kind of weird things is this great big plate of a pommel. It's a great big sort of almost mushroom shaped flat plate. The second thing I note is that the oak grip has two Makugi pins through it. So it's a similar hilt construction. I don't know how that's put on, and I don't know how the pommel is therefore secured, but it looks like a removable grip, but then you can't remove it because that pommel's there, so that's a bit confusing. Then we've got a push stud and another push stud. Again, like the other one, it's got an open backed scabbard because the blade gets broader towards the base. So let's now open that up and be careful of this edge. Oh, there's another push stud. Oh my God. That is just monstrous. So it's basically like a glaive blade. It's actually very similar to certain medieval European glaive blades, but on a short shaft with a pommel. So it's kind of like a short glaive, isn't it? God, on a long pole, that would make an absolutely awesome glaive. But that is fearsome, and it looks badass, doesn't it? That looks so cool. I will point out though, it's pretty damn short. Let's compare it to some known things. If I just grab a European 19th century sabre, for example, the sabre, cavalry sabre, so it's about a 34-inch blade, is quite a bit longer. So it's a fairly short blade without measuring it. Whew, it's very, very sharp. It's got this habaki-like fitting at the base, seems to be made of iron, that we find on a lot of Chinese dao of the Ming Dynasty and onwards and into the Qing. It has a suba-like guard, which again we find on lots of Chinese swords. In fact, it's something that comes into China and Japan from somewhere else. It's difficult to say who invented the idea of a disc-like guard, but they appear I think they appear in Japan in about the 9th or 10th century, and they appear in China a little bit later than that, maybe about the 11th, 12th century. Very characteristic and unusual pommel. I'm not sure what the origin or explanation of that kind of pommel is. I will say it's not super comfortable to the hand, but it doesn't hurt the hand. It's just weird. It's quite a weird big plate, so very interesting. I'll need to get used to that. But I love the shape of that blade. I mean, it's absolutely fearsome, isn't it? It moves like an absolute dream because it's got such a long grip and such a short blade. This you could actually use in quite short, in quite close distance. And you know, yeah, it's a curved blade, but you could certainly still thrust with this. So what a fascinating weapon. My first thoughts about this, unlike the two big straight ones, so that kind of feels like a shock weapon that you might indeed use against cavalry, or you might mix in people with these with your regular infantry as shock troops. Whereas this somehow feels to me more like, almost like a knightly weapon, if that makes sense, like something closer to a short glaive, actually, that someone who's wearing a decent amount of armour might use as their personal weapon in close melee combat. It somehow, I think because of the balance, because it's balanced quite close to the hand and quite nimble, it feels a very, very different thing to this. This feels like a massive cleaver, almost halberd-like or axe-like, and this feels almost more like a, I don't know, it's difficult to know what to compare it to. Some bits of it make me feel a bit like a poleaxe, or I think a glaive. You know, in medieval Europe, glaives were used as personal close-in weapons by knights and bodyguards. So that's kind of what it feels like to me. This feels more like a bodyguard's weapon, or a kind of knightly type weapon, and this feels more like a shock troops weapon. And then this one feels more like somewhere in between the two, almost like an officer's version of that cleaver, or a kind of knightly version of that cleaver. And this one really feels, I suppose, like for its size, a slightly overweight Langmesser. Like a short meat cleaver. This feels like something that your lightly equipped and lightly armoured troops would have as a backup sidearm to augment a crossbow or a spear or something like that, or a firearm indeed. So anyway, 4 very fascinating swords from LK Chen. Obviously linked to LK Chen below. You can check out the full details and stats of these swords on their website now. Thanks a lot to LK and KK for sending these to me. Full reviews will follow in due course, and I'll put them up against some other swords as well, and let's see how these things perform. I think of these 4, my favourites are these 2, in different ways. And to fight with, I think I'd probably prefer that. But that's super cool as well. Anyway, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you on the channel again soon. Cheers, folks.